Hi everyone, welcome to Mobile DevOps is a Thing, a podcast by Bitrise showcasing mobile developers from all around the world. Today we're mainly focusing on Android-related challenges, how they can be solved by using the right tools and technologies, and we'll also discuss the roadmap to mobile success and what the most important steps are that you can take to improve your processes. My name is Nora Basie, and I'm here today with Kevin Toms, developer advocate. Hey, Kevin, how are you?
Hi, good evening.
And our special guest today is Peter-John or PJ Welcome, Google developer expert for Firebase from Johannesburg, South Africa. Hey, PJ, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. A bit of a heat wave going on here in Budapest. So thank you so much for coming to this podcast. Just a little bit about you. So you've been working in mobile development for over 10 years. You regularly blog about new technologies in mobile and talk about these things at conferences and developer meetups, etc. So can you share a bit more about yourself and your background?
Yeah, so I've been doing mobile development for quite a while. I started in university. Doing some projects because I got an iPhone and I was like, hey, there's these apps that you can make. So then I started there and then eventually just got into a profession of doing that. And then, I've been doing it for quite a while, different companies, doing consulting, also doing some freelancing. And I've picked up like a few skills along the way. Such as doing CICD pipelines and mobile DevOps, which is something that I'm pretty passionate about these days. And in my spare time, I do photography. So I do a little bit of wildlife photography, mostly birds. Really like birds. And that's mostly me.
Oh, that's really cool. I actually already know about the photography part because I watched some of your talks the other day. But another interesting thing that you mentioned is that you came up with or defined a roadmap to success for mobile. And it includes all the important components that are needed to create a successful pipeline. And it's made up of different parts, starting from like branching, release strategies, code reviews, and then you expand on app architecture, code coverage, and static code analysis. And finally, you kind of explain how these all fit into automation and the CI/CD process, which I think would be really interesting to hear about for the listeners. So can you tell us a bit more about this roadmap and the steps that lead to mobile success?
Yeah, so I think I'll kind of just start off with where I kind of started off in that presentation, which was branching strategies. So I think everybody kind of starts off their project, and I really hope that they put it in some kind of source control, and it's not like on like, I don't know, Google Drive or something like that. And a part of that is obviously having some kind of branching strategy in terms of like how you create features, how you merge code back into a specific branch, how you would release your specific product for different types of versions of the product. So you're obviously iterating on the product at some point, and you need to obviously version that and all of those type of things. So branching strategies kind of come in there, that it kind of just helps you with, especially when you're working in a team, how you would pretty much create new features, and then obviously put code back into the product and actually being able to build that specific product and release it to your users, and all of that. Then there's obviously things like architecture, static code analysis, which then becomes really important when you're trying to build a more maintainable application, or more testable application also at the end of the day. So you want to make sure that you have an architecture that allows you to write unit tests, and you kind of want to add static code analysis so that you can add some kind of like rules around your code base so that like your code is pretty consistent in whatever you're building within your team. And then we kind of want to tie all of those things together with something and kind of automate the process so that we don't have to be doing all of this manually. So that's kind of where CI/CD comes in, and creating a pipeline where, based on a specific branching strategy, you would then add specific automated points where a CI/CD pipeline would pretty much automate a specific process of, as you create a branch, a feature branch, and you want to merge it back in, it makes sure that the code builds, it makes sure that the unit tests that were previously there are passing, and it also just checks your static code analysis to make sure that all those rules that you've kind of put in place and that consistency in your code is kind of keeping up to the same standard. And then you can obviously create processes that are automated once you've merged code to then create releases, create tags, create versioning on your specific product to then be able to release that to your users without you having to do anything.
Awesome, thanks. Another thing I wanted to ask you about is your consultancy experience. You're basically helping engineers get DevOps up and running and to make the most out of their processes by introducing more automation, and also by making sure that their process or their CI pipeline is as streamlined as possible and that they are familiar with the best practices of the industry. Can you share more about this experience?
Yeah, so I used to be kind of more part of the consultancy side of things, and at that point, I had the opportunity to help some clients set up CI/CD pipelines where they maybe didn't have one specifically for mobile apps. They would just kind of like deploy from someone's machine or something like that, or just create and then upload it to the Play Store or to the App Store from a machine, and managed to at least help them set up a specific pipeline to get that automated and not always rely on, let's say, a specific person within their team. So I think from a consultancy point of view, there's sometimes it's a little bit difficult because you have to kind of show why this is valuable for the company or for the team itself. But I think once you actually add that specific CI/CD pipeline or that mobile DevOps workflows to a specific project, it definitely helps the client realize that this is something that they've always needed. Because it can be a struggle to convince people that have pretty much been doing a specific workflow for a certain amount of time. And I guess it costs them money at the end of the day for them to take, let's say, a week out of their development time to kind of set these things up, but then only see the benefits once the team starts like actually iterating a lot faster. And then also it makes releases a lot faster also and a lot smoother because you're not reliant on a specific person.
Oh, thank you. So you mentioned that you're passionate about mobile DevOps, and you said in one of your talks, I believe, I don't know if I'm quoting correctly, but something like mobile DevOps is something that everybody should have and that it should be mandatory. And we're really happy to hear this because that's the same message we're trying to convey at Bitrise. So I was just wondering how you came to this conclusion, what it means to you exactly, and why do you think it's so important for mobile?
So I think mobile DevOps, I think it kind of comes down to CI/CD for mobile. There are specific workflows that in mobile that we have that don't apply to, let's say, web development or backend development. So I would say that mobile DevOps is pretty much, let's say, your standard branching strategy of CI/CD, where you'd create a branch, you'd maybe do some kind of like CI to build the actual your application to make sure that everything compiles correctly. That would be across pretty much every domain. You'd look at linting, because linting is also language specific. So you can have language specific linting. You can also have framework specific linting. So there's like Android linting. So that could be part of your workflow. But I think once we kind of get to a point where we actually need to build an application and we need to start testing an application, I think that's where the mobile world kind of like differs. So when we actually archive and build an application, let's say a debug version, we have to think about, on an iOS point of view, we have to think about provisioning profiles, and we need to think about certificates. We need to think about, on an Android side, we can create debug versions without like a key store, but like we still need to be able to archive that specific thing. And then we need to be able to deploy it on devices, right? So we need to be able to put it on people's phones so that like testers will be able to test on a specific device. Also, we have such a wide array of mobile devices these days, from Samsungs to Pixels to iPhones to Huawei's. We pretty much need to make sure that these apps that we are building can actually work on all of these devices. So this is where we kind of differ in terms of mobile DevOps, where we need to pretty much take that archive and be able to distribute it from a debug point of view, so that testers or test engineers will be able to actually test these things. And then also, once we've gone through, let's say, a cycle of testing, we need to be able to deploy this to our app stores and our Google Play Store, where we also need to go through different other processes. So like we generally have like alpha, beta internal releases that are run through TestFlight and Google Play. Those are not things that like web developers kind of have to deal with. They just kind of like put it on a staging server or something like that, and then people click on it, they can insta deploy. We have to go through processes of approvals from Apple, let's say, and Google also now has an approval process, so that apps are actually good for the people that are using them. So there's an actual approval process and all of that. So you want to automate all of those processes. You don't want everybody to be dealing with certificates and all of those type of things. And that's kind of where the mobile DevOps part of it and the automation part comes in, where you kind of want to make sure that all of those things are kind of handled, and it's not kind of a dependency on, let's say, a specific team member or even the team itself.
Yeah, you highlighted something that I was going to ask you about, which is that it is different for mobile. DevOps is very different on mobile, and that was a good explanation of some of the differences there. I also noticed when you said earlier that convincing you, when you do your consulting, you're talking to a company and convincing them that they need it at all. What are the things you start on to tell them that they need it? How do you actually start convincing them that, hey, this is something you should do? Because they're saying, no, Bob in the corner there, he just sends it up to the App Store and it kind of works. We don't have much problem with it. So that might be the view they have, not realizing the need. So how do you start?
Yeah, I think that's quite an interesting question, because I think when it comes down to convincing people, I think they only realize it when they have it. So you kind of have to convince them to put it in, and then once they have it, they're like, oh, okay, like this is actually useful. I think when you're kind of working in a bigger team, I think when they start getting merge conflicts inside of their application, where they get branching strategy, where people are just kind of like pulling code into different branches and things are not working. When somebody pulls the master or the main branch, and all of a sudden code's not compiling. Those are small things that you can kind of like say CI pretty much like takes that away. Like you won't have that issue because you'll never ever merge broken code, because you actually have to build the code to make sure that it actually compiles. So that's the first thing. You also then have another situation where you can say, hey, you always have the latest build of the specific app that you're building, because the CI will pretty much be running as people are committing code. We can actually automate a build process, and you'll have your new feature within a certain amount of time, like within like 30 minutes of it actually being pretty much committed to your main branch. So I think that's pretty that's pretty much one of the biggest things. And then also you go and you say, hey, what if Bob goes on leave or Bob leaves the company? Then what happens? I think that's the biggest thing. Then you're like, okay, well, we'll just get somebody else to do it. But if that person they don't know what to do, then Bob has to pretty much go and say, hey, let me upskill this person. But these processes are very they're like terminal based like projects. So you pretty much can a bot can run it. And technically that's what CI is. It's like a bot pretty much taking over and just kind of running the processes as you ask it to trigger specific things. So you kind of want that automation. And then you can also just then say, it will also help with development time. It will help with bugs, fixing bugs, well, actually catching bugs, because you'll know that even if you do write unit tests, you also need to make sure that it could be passing on one person's machine. I've seen this happen often where it works on one person's machine, but like the tests are failing on the build server. And it's because maybe they forgot to commit something, or it's they pretty much like they have some, I don't know, environmental variables on their machine that are making things pass. But then as soon as somebody else pulls the code, it doesn't pass anymore. So you kind of have to make sure that this kind of gives you a universal environment, like an environment out there that pretty much says, hey, we know that it works in this very clean environment where there is nothing there in the beginning. We install everything at runtime of this build, kind of kicking off, and then it runs the code. So we know that it's not relying on anybody's specific machine and anybody's specific configuration. And I think that kind of is what gets people to try it out. And then once they've actually tried it out, they're like, this is actually really cool. And yeah, and then hopefully they end up actually trying it out and getting it working.
Yeah, so to some extent, like you said, they're not keen to spend the money or the time. So you point out the risks that they're unaware of. What if Bob goes on holiday or leaves the company? Maybe they don't realize that his machine is the only one with the keys on to be able to do deployment. And what they might also not realize is it only works. You gave a classic example of it works on my machine. I don't understand why it's failing. And that's another characteristic that you can eliminate by having, as you said, a clean machine in your DevOps system. So if that was talking about convincing business. So, you're saying you guys should do this. Another interesting thing is if you're talking to an individual developer, a mobile developer who says it all works for me, you really want him on your side, not saying, yeah, they want us to do this, but I've got to get this code written. I haven't got time for all this. How do you convince a mobile developer who's never used DevOps, CICD? What would you start with him to get him to start to buy into the idea?
Yeah, I think that's quite difficult because you probably need to want to do it. You kind of need to know about it. So I think if you kind of see that other people are doing it, I think a lot of people kind of approach that type of situation where oh, what are they doing? That seems like it's something that could work for me, but it might take a lot of time. For me, I think that it's quite important to pretty much do a file new, open a blank project, and then pretty much close the project and then start off creating your DevOps. But if someone's never ever done it before and they need kind of convincing, I think the biggest thing is once you start working with other people, I think that's where the difficulty comes in. I think individuals might think that everything works correctly. They might even find that their application might not even really work as they expected once it gets to production. And a CI can help with that a lot as an individual, where you can say, I'm almost creating another teammate and testing. The CI is another teammate and I'm testing it on that machine to make sure that everything still works correctly. So I would see it as something like that versus obviously the better approach is the better convincing approach for an individual is as soon as they get another person on their team, this is when CI will shine for them. even just for two people, just to make sure that everything is actually working correctly. But yeah, you can kind of see it as a teammate if you're an individual to make sure that whatever you're doing does actually work. And if I need to, even if I need to switch computers, like let's say my computer crashes and now I need to, yes, I can pull the code down, but like what if I had specific things on that other machine? At least I know that like any environmental variables, anything that I had installed on my machine is now going to, I can go look at that configuration that I did for the CI, and I can put that configuration back onto my machine so that I know that it will build correctly.
Yeah, it definitely acts as a backup, which strengthens your whole system. Another interesting thing I was thinking about, because you said earlier, and we talked about earlier, that mobile DevOps is different to other DevOps and it has characteristic difference. Well, mobile applications often aren't freestanding, just doing mobile. They're talking to a server through an API and working with traditional development, web application development, API server development. Do you, in your experience, come across that they have their own DevOps and they think you just got to plug your mobile stuff into here because we've already got it? Is that something you've experienced? And do they understand the difference that mobile introduces? Is that part of your experience?
Yeah, I think people do. I think a lot of people do see it as different. I think they probably don't realize until they see it, where like, how do we test this application? I think that's the part that a lot of people don't understand, that in web development, it's kind of like, yes, the CI might seem the same, but like, how do we actually deploy this thing? They just kind of like deploy it on a server, and then they're like, okay, cool, I can now talk to the backend, right? Because I have the whole internet, I have a computer, and like, it just kind of all works. Whereas now you have to think about, how do I deploy this thing on a mobile device? It's actually an external device from where you've been developing your application itself. And then you need to think about like, cool, mobile phones do have internet and stuff, but you have to think about data, and yeah, you can be on Wi-Fi, but like you just have to think about a whole bunch of things. So I think people do see it as a little bit different only once they think about, how do we deploy this? I think they probably think it's exactly the same from a maybe a strategy point of view of like building the application. Like they'll have like npm to like do npm build or whatever, and then they're like, oh, you just do Gradle build, right? And then it builds the application and you can pretty much deploy it. I think that's where the difference comes in. With mobile, you would pretty much like, yeah, you can Gradle build it, and then you have to archive it into a specific format, and then from there you can then deploy it. And yeah, I think you then you have to think about, how does it then talk to the backend and all of those type of things. So yeah,
so what you're deploying to is more complicated in itself. And the other thing is that although a browser runs on different devices, it's actually quite well standardized now. There's, the way it works is very well established, whereas on mobile, even say on Android, you have a wide variation of the screen sizes and the way they work with soft keys and hard keys and things like that. So there's a lot of different devices to test on. And I think that's one of the characteristic differences that perhaps people coming from a web application background don't realize. Apart from the things you talked about, it might not be connected and things like that. It might not be on the internet. So yeah, that kind of automated testing becomes important, which is part of CICD, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think something that you even touched on right now is that I think on the web, it has been standardized really, really well. I think there's a whole bunch of like browsers also. So we have to take into account that, like, I think a lot of people test on Chrome, but maybe they don't test on Safari as web developers. So they might like get a little bit of differences there. But I think on mobile, there's so many platforms where Android, let's say, for example, is an open source platform, and Samsung goes and kind of builds their own version of Android to put on their devices. And then Huawei goes and builds their version of Android and puts it on their devices, OnePlus, Pixel, all of those. And it's not always easy for app developers to make sure that it actually works on all of those. We think it works on everything, but it actually doesn't. So even like you said, testing on multiple devices and being able to deploy on multiple devices is pretty key to mobile DevOps, because you want to make sure that like you have a place where you can actually test on multiple devices. And I think that probably comes down to something like having a device farm or something like that.
So the way I see it is that we have DevOps as an umbrella topic for all types of software. And then under that, we have mobile DevOps, which is also kind of like a separate entity because it's different. And then within mobile DevOps, we can be even more specific. And some would say that Android DevOps deserves its own category, because it has so many challenges like device fragmentation. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of different devices, which also makes testing a lot more challenging for Android. So you have experience with iOS and Android as well. So what do you think about this? Is there something that makes the lives of Android developers harder than for iOS developers?
Yeah, I think definitely testing on Android is a lot more difficult. I think there it comes down to not only different OSs, well, I guess device manufacturers, I would say, not OSs, but also API levels. So generally, iOS in the iOS community, a lot of developers only kind of support like they say N-1 or N-2 in terms of like versions of iOS. So they'll be like supporting, we have iOS 14 that's stable at the moment. So they'll support iOS 14 and 13. Whereas because a lot of iPhone users pretty much always are on the latest version of iOS. So if you look at the fragmentation of that versioning, it's not actually that like that critical to be able to test on iOS, like let's say 8 or 9. Whereas on Android, besides the manufacturing like differences that might come about when using like a Samsung versus a Pixel, you then also have like versions of Android that have a whole bunch of different APIs that come with it. So you might be looking at using a certain animation API, but it's only supported in Android 26, but like your users are pretty much from API 21. You kind of have to support all of those specific Android versions because a lot of phones support a lot of versions within Android. So it does make it a lot harder to test, definitely versus iOS, whereas iOS, you pretty much, Apple, again, also only has like a few devices. So these days, I think it's like 6S up to the latest version, I think is like iPhone 12. So you don't have many devices that you really need to test on. Yeah, maybe you need to test on iPad and all of that, but like you don't really need to test on like an array of different OS manufacturers plus the versions of the OS also, because that makes a massive difference also, because some things are just implemented completely different on platform APIs for specific versions and stuff like that. So yeah, and a lot of these OS manufacturers also provide their own SDKs on top of that also. So now you have Samsung's SDK because they have their own way of using, let's say, biometrics or something like that. So you need to kind of use their SDK on, let's say, their devices, or Huawei has their own versioning of doing specific things. So they want you to use their specific libraries to support their devices also. So that also becomes something that makes it a lot more difficult to test, whereas you just get everything from Apple when it comes to iOS development. It's like you get the iOS SDK, it has everything in it, you don't need anything more.
Yeah, and what you described actually really makes it sound painful for testing, to be honest. And it's certainly true that if there's one thing you could give Apple credit for, is they have always done a good job of dragging people forward onto the latest versions of iOS. They really push that along, and therefore you don't have to go so far back as Android. But now you've described that situation of so much fragmentation and so many different devices to test on. Obviously, nobody can very easily collect all the devices and say, we'll do all these tests on there. So what do you see as the approach to solve that problem, to do all that testing, perhaps in a CICD DevOps point of view? I'm wondering about Firebase here as well. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so definitely, I think the concept here would pretty much be a device farm. And a device farm is pretty much a place where there are a bunch of physical devices that you can pretty much access to run your application on. And yeah, like you mentioned, Firebase actually has Firebase Test Lab, which is a product that allows you to run your application on both Android and iOS on multiple versions of the OS itself, let's say for iOS, and then also multiple, on Android side, it's multiple versions plus multiple devices also. So you can run these on physical and virtual devices, which is really, really nice. And I think this pretty much gives you a really good benefit of seeing that your application will work in specific scenarios where you, let's say you don't have a real test device for a Pixel, or I think a Pixel is probably because Android Studio comes with like a Pixel emulator, but let's say you don't have a Samsung device or Huawei device, you can actually go and deploy it, your application there, run some automation tests. So pretty much like some UI tests or robo test even. So they actually provide a way of creating a robo test, and it will pretty much click around your application and make sure that like all the flows specifically work, which is really, really nice. So this is definitely a great way to definitely test as much as you can, and you can actually plug this into your CI like you mentioned. So generally what I would recommend there is that you probably do this as a nightly build where everyone is sleeping, because generally these builds take really, really long. So you would do a build, you deploy it there, and you kind of wait for the results to come back. And as it's clicking around, it's actually like physically tapping on the screen, not like humans, but like there's like a robo test happening and stuff like that. And yeah, once you get the results back, you can then confirm that it works on a specific device and a specific OS. And then another alternative to that is also, if you can't use, let's say you can't use Firebase or something like that, there's also Amazon Device Farm. They also have a way of doing the specific thing where you can deploy your application to multiple devices.
I mean, it's an interesting point there you picked out, that this can be very time consuming. It could be something you'd want to run overnight. That is an immediately available part of having a cloud-based CI CD system running, that you can do that. And what it makes me think is that you've got a developer, say, running tests on his machine, you've got deployment to think about, and then you've got these comprehensive tests. It seems like immediately it's defining at least 3 different build types you want to do, triggered in different ways. And is that what you would normally recommend in your experience, that these multiple different types of builds are created, and one's running overnight, one's running just to keep up to date with the basic tests, and perhaps another one when you want to actually deploy to test devices that people are going to actually pick up on? Is that, or is there more? What's your experience of that?
Yeah, so definitely, I think there's definitely different workflows for different specific things that you're trying to achieve, and definitely cloud-based is the best, just because running something like on a machine like in your office and stuff like that can also be a little bit daunting in terms of like you have to upgrade the machines all the time to the latest versions. You might have to have multiple machines that have different OSs on it, let's say, to run different versions. Let's say you want to run the beta version of iOS 15 at the moment. I think it's for iOS 15, yeah. So you're running the beta version, like now you need to actually go and take one machine, actually run Xcode there, and like it's just too much work to kind of like to do that. So obviously cloud-based is really great for that. But back to your question about like multiple workflows. Yeah, you definitely need multiple workflows to do specific things. So you would want one for you building specific code, like let's say on feature branches, and this is where like your branching strategy would come in, because you'd want to trigger specific workflows for specific types of branches. So there you'd want to do linting and all of those type of things, running your unit tests to make sure that your unit tests are all good still. And then like, let's say you want to then do a nightly build of these UI tests because they're time consuming. You don't want to really run them during the day while developers are working, because that might also hold up an agent that you need to pretty much be running your specific builds on. So if you have multiple agents, you don't want that agent to pretty much be holding up for like an hour of building UI tests, because you need to be obviously doing things a lot faster. So you definitely have a build there, and then you want to build for deploying your app to testers, but you also wanted a trigger or workflow to then archive your application, let's say, to then go and sign it, because you definitely need to sign it at some point with either a provisioning profile and production certificates on iOS, or you need a key store on Android, and you need to actually sign that application in order to upload it to the Google Play Store before it gets reviewed. So you definitely want workflows that allow you to pretty much give you the flexibility to not only be able to do one thing with your specific, like let's say CI. You want to be able to jump around based on where in the workflow the code is in terms of your pipeline itself.
Yeah, and you don't get any of these capabilities until you introduce DevOps and a CI/CD system. I mean, it gives you the option to create these different workflows and develop your processes much more within your organization. It really opens up that opportunity.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. I don't think you can do it without it. Like, you could probably write a bunch of scripts that runs on someone's machine, but I don't know how you would do triggers and timing and all of those type of things. Like, I think that you'd probably pretty much have to be like, okay, this person now merged the code. Let me run the script and go back to the master branch, run it, and then like it runs on their machine, and then maybe it hooks up to some kind of I don't know, some kind of like cloud machine somewhere or something like that. But like you don't want any human interaction, right? So like with CI, there's obviously continuous deployment and continuous delivery. And a lot of people want continuous deployment where there's pretty much no human interaction, but continuous delivery, obviously, just when you on that release part of your CI where you need to approve, someone needs to at least approve the fact that like we're going to have this release, but everything else should be automated. You shouldn't have any reliance on any person in the company. And this will obviously help with maintenance of your application going forward. If your whole development team, let's say, leaves the company and you now get a whole new development team, like your app is still stable, and you'll pretty much have, let's say, a weekly build of just running the CI workflow to make sure that all the unit tests are still passing. You can do that on a daily basis even. Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of benefits to having a CI, definitely, versus not having it. I don't see any benefits of not having it, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, anything where you're relying on just people has a potential of failure. So anything where you automate it reduces that risk of human failure, if nothing else. And that actually highlights one of the things that is so well known to developers and can be eliminated by this, or almost completely eliminated, is regression, where people are doing a new feature, they think it's great, they release it, they've tested it, it's all going fine. And they should check that the rest of the application is still working as before, but that's very time consuming, and they've got a deadline and they need to get this out. And this is one of the things that will trip people up, where they've created a regression failure and something that used to work no longer works. When you are talking about running comprehensive testing, which runs on multiple devices, but it's running overnight, that's one of the best ways to help prevent that kind of event, because regression is being done automatically. And you're out, you're on your night out or you're sleeping, and it's doing the work for you. And one of the great benefits, I think, of which is a well-known way people fail.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Yeah, regression testing is something that a lot of people probably don't do, to be honest. And they're hoping that everything still works. And maybe sometimes they even just depend on like writing unit tests and all of those type of things. But like having both unit tests, having UI tests, having a device form, having your application on a device form, and having it, it's pretty much like just having an automated test engineer, pretty much like testing your thing every single day without you pretty much knowing. And in the morning you can come back and say, hey, there was a failure on this. Maybe someone can look at it. Maybe you can even automate the fact that it can create a Jira task for you, so that you can investigate what actually happened. And you can even see like, and it could even create some kind of like Crashlytics for you, to say that this is actually failing on multiple devices, on a debug version that we've sent to the device form. Let's actually have a look and see where this is actually failing. So it just gives you that security that you're adding new features and you might be touching some legacy code, and you want to make sure that, like, from a CI point of view, that your unit tests are running, all the logic should still stay the same, but like before deploying, you still want to run some kind of workflow to make sure that we have some automated UI tests that are, or at least a robo test, which is pretty much, it's like a free test pretty much, where something just goes and clicks around in your application. That helps tremendously with regression for your application.
So do you believe that Google has done a good job of providing tools that help DevOps practices?
I would say yes, because they bought Firebase. So once they added like Firebase Test Lab, once they also created products like I think they bought Crashlytics also. It used to be called Fabric. They brought that into Firebase, and I think they also have like performance monitoring. So, and then they have app distribution also. So they have a bunch of tools that definitely do help developers from that perspective. I think if you don't use Firebase, let's say your company is very like let's say a Microsoft shop, and they kind of want you to use like Azure DevOps and stuff like that to actually run your builds, and you need to use specific tools, then I think it might be not the greatest experience for Android developers, because I don't think they actually make a lot of tools to specifically run like DevOps. Like you'd pretty much just be writing command line like Gradle scripts to pretty much like run on your CI and stuff like that. So that's kind of that might not be great, but I definitely think from a Firebase point of view, which I consider as Google, I think they definitely have created some good tools for developers on that front. And yeah, hopefully some of these tools, I mean, can pretty much get into Android Studio at some point, where people could maybe even run them locally to make sure that everything's like kind of like working. But I mean, yeah, something like a device farm is, I think you can actually run from Android Studio, where you could actually like run your build into a device farm from Android Studio, which could be, I definitely remember seeing that somewhere at some point.
Right. So now that we talked about the advantages of having CI and automation in place, let's talk a bit about CI tools. So you've mentioned that you've tried every single CI out there, from Jenkins, Circle CI, GitHub Actions, Bodybuild, Bitrise, etc. And I'm curious about your opinion. So what do you think? What are the advantages of each of these CI providers, and what kind of scenarios each of them would be good for? How would you compare them?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it comes down to, let's say your, not to say skill level, but like if you're a beginner with DevOps and you've kind of never done it before, there's certain CIs for that. And then there's certain CIs that if you're good at like writing bash scripts and you're comfortable with the terminal, then there's others for a specific there's other CIs that will maybe be advantageous for that. I generally recommend Bitrise just because it's a lot easier. I found it the easiest one to kind of like get up and running. I actually wrote a small article about it, about the different CIs, my experience with actually working with them. And I found that Bitrise was the easiest to set up, like going forward. Like you literally go and click like 3 buttons, I think it is, and then like you have a CI up and running. And it auto detects your project and everything from GitHub or from Bitbucket. And yeah, it like really works really great. So for beginners, I definitely recommend using Bitrise. I've obviously used like GitHub Actions extensively. I've tried Semaphore CI. I tried Circle CI. A lot of those ones are very command line based. So I feel like those ones are a lot more advanced. They do give you the ability to do a lot more, especially from a bash script point of view. But I know that like on Bitrise, you can also, there's steps to pretty much write bash scripts if you want to. There's a lot of steps there that like community members have written that pretty much help you do stuff like SonarQube. If you want to add SonarQube to your CI, you pretty much just throw a step in there and you give it your Sonar properties, and it pretty much does all the work for you. Whereas you would pretty much like on any other CI provider, you'd probably have to know exactly what to write. So you'd have to do like Gradle bold, and then you need to run Jacoco tests, and then then you have to go and say sonar -- scan. So if you don't really know the command line tool really well, you probably need to go and figure that out, and that can also be quite daunting. But I mean, yeah, I think it also just comes down to each CI provider is very company specific. Also, some companies, I think, if you're starting out, I would recommend Bitrise, definitely. But I think like some companies are kind of already tied to specific products, like using Azure DevOps, or some companies are already in the GitHub ecosystem and they're using GitHub Actions for their web development or something like that. Then they would probably want to just kind of stick to having, I guess, one bowl at the end of the month. So they like kind of maybe force their mobile developers to just use GitHub Actions. But I think, yeah, I think there's a lot to learn in the approach of like how CIs are built, or how to create a great workflow and how to make it quite easy for people in your team to actually like access the CI, and how easy it is to get feedback very quickly, feedback loops, and then also updating those build servers we spoke about earlier, making sure that you have the latest macOS available, and the latest Xcode versions available for you to be able to run your application on, or the latest Gradle version also, if you need to run them on Gradle 7 or whatever. So yeah, I think that also is something that you should look at when it comes to build servers itself. Do you need to manually install it as part of your script, or is it just like available there for you to use? Yeah.
You mentioned SonarQube there. Another aspect of CI systems is the added value you can get by doing other things like enhancing the code coverage reporting and code quality tools. What's your experience in that area, and what do you advise people do?
Yeah, so I think that comes down to like your static code analysis, analyzing your code, having your rules in place, your linting rules. And then obviously you want to make sure that you don't have any code smells, you don't have any security risks. And like you mentioned, you want to make sure, what is your code coverage? Do you have like 50% or 80% code coverage? And are people actually writing tests when they're creating new features? So you can analyze your code on specific branches and stuff like that. So I definitely think that stuff like SonarQube is great. There's a lot of other tools out there. But I mean, what these kind of things in your CI actually give you is they give reporting and an overview of the code itself to people like, let's say, maybe technical leads or engineering managers, or even like the product teams. This allows them to kind of see the value in unit testing and making sure that they know that all the scenarios are covered. They know that the code doesn't have any code smells. There's no security risks because you're running some kind of security analyzing on the code, and then this uploads as a report every single day, or even like every single feature that actually gets uploaded, every single feature that gets committed, you would be uploading a report. So I definitely think that it's really, really, as part of your CI process, you get to actually then give a broader overview of the state of your project, which is great, because how else would you actually analyze and then send a report? This is now being uploaded to your SonarQube account, and anybody within your team can go and access and look at the stats and actually also see if you have created like code smells in your code. Sometimes you don't even realize that you have. This also gives you the ability to then say, hey, we have X amount of tech debt within our project, and that specific tech debt needs to pretty much be tackled at a specific time. Otherwise, we are going to have X amount of, like, let's say, failures, or it's going to affect X amount of customers at a later stage. So you kind of want to keep your code base as clean and maintainable as possible also.
I think you've just highlighted something there. There's an old adage, you can't manage what you can't measure. And what you're highlighting there is, you can imagine that a team without DevOps and a good CI system would be completing code, testing it, deploying it, making it live and say, hey, we're doing fine. But they don't realize, because they're not measuring this kind of information, that they have technical debt or security weaknesses and this sort of thing. So only when you've got your DevOps and your CI system are you able to start introducing these tools to give you that vision of the real state of your code, because you're only working on, oh, well, it works, it's live. You don't know what's going on inside, you might say. So that's a definite benefit. So.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, I think a lot of people don't realize that. And I think a lot of developers actually probably get hounded for like stats about the application and some kind of visuals. I think like more business people like visuals, they like graphs and all of those type of things. So if they can see that like your code coverage is at 99% and that we have no code smells and we have no security vulnerabilities, I think it'll make everybody sleep at night a lot better. So I think that's quite important when it comes to this type of, like, let's say, reporting.
That's an interesting point. You just made me think of it there. I've always thought that one of the problems in software development that makes management really anxious is they can't see anything. If an app is being developed and it's 50% developed, they can't see that. Compared to, say, if they're having a building built, they would say, hey, I can see there's 5 floors already built now. Well, inside in the software, that might be true. And the software developers, yeah, no, we've got a lot written, but the management is saying are nervous because they can't see anything at all until it's got to a stage where something is demonstrated. But like, as you're saying, those kind of statistics are very reassuring to management, and they come out of this process. So that's definitely a bonus there.
Yeah, definitely. I think it will definitely help people. Like, instead of just having the application where they can click on buttons, they can also kind of really know what's happening within the code base without actually having to be able to read code itself. They can actually just go and look at, like, hey, there are these vulnerabilities or there are these code smells, and the developer doesn't just want to work on tech debt because they don't want to do any features. There's actually stats to back up why developers are asking for tech debt sprints and stuff like that. So I think it helps management, but it also helps developers having these type of things. And you will only really be able to get these things. You could get them up and running without CI, but like, you want to add it as part of your process where it's seamless at the end of the day. You don't want to be like having to upload these reports at the end of every long day of like writing code or fighting fires or something like that. So yeah.
Okay, so PJ, it sounds like you're getting your knowledge from a lot of different sources, which is amazing. And I was just wondering if you can recommend a go-to place to pick up new skills and knowledge when it comes to mobile development.
Yeah, so I would definitely recommend newsletters. There's like Android Weekly, Swift Weekly, iOS Weekly. Yeah, I think a lot of community members are writing really good content out there. I think there's blogs. I know Bitrise has a blog, so there's some blogging material there. I write some blogs also. I've written some stuff on CICD, and yeah, I think definitely there's a wide array of articles out there. There's a wide array of talks on YouTube. If you just type in mobile DevOps, or if you just type in DevOps for Android, then yeah, I think you'll find a lot of things. Something that I didn't actually mention, which is something that I really enjoy using when it does come to mobile DevOps, is Fastlane. Fastlane is like literally my favorite tool. I use it like for every project. So like, I think that's also a great tool to get started. And I think that tool plugs into pretty much like most CIs also. And I think even Bitrise has step lanes and stuff like that for Fastlane. So it makes it a lot easier for you. You can write some Ruby code if you like Ruby, and then you can pretty much get your CI set up there. So I think, yeah, a lot of documentation out there. Yeah, but definitely follow newsletters. I think both in the mobile community, I think there's a lot of people always willing to help and always giving out, writing articles that like will help people on their journey as mobile engineers, especially on the DevOps side of things.
Oh, thanks. That's very helpful. There's one question we ask every guest in this podcast, and it's how to describe your job to your parents or grandparents.
That's a tough one. I generally just say I write apps. I make apps. I think they kind of realize that they know what an app is at this point, but I still get people asking me to fix their computers. And I'm like, it's not what I do. But yeah, I just say I make apps, and they don't ask how. They just see it as IT. I think IT has always been the word that kind of like, that people kind of like see it as. But yeah, they don't really understand what like software engineering is. So you just say apps, and then they're like, oh, have I used one of your apps before? And I'm like, probably not. But yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good one. Sorry, Kevin, did you want to say something?
No, I can totally relate though to somebody saying, can you fix my computer? That definitely is something that comes with the territory. But definitely in years, I don't know how to use them. So yeah, but surely you know how to fix it.
Yeah, exactly. Especially like I haven't been using Windows for a while, for like a couple of years, and generally people have Windows machines, and then they're just like, can you fix this? And I'm like, I don't even know how Windows works anymore. Like, so yeah, it becomes a little bit tough at some point.
I think that's probably a characteristic of people who work with mobile as well, because if you're doing iOS, you're going to be using a Mac. So then you might as well be using the Mac for everything. So yeah, that's my experience too. I don't understand Windows machines. I don't like having to use them because things aren't where you expect them to be.
Yeah, no, definitely. Even your terminal is different. Like you have to install Bash, and like it's crazy. It's crazy stuff.
It's true. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, before I joined Bitrise, I'd only used Windows. And when I came for the job interview, they kind of left me alone with the Mac to write something on it. And I had no idea how it worked. Like, what is this? Control-C, Control-V doesn't work. What do I do? So yeah, I panicked a bit, but somehow managed.
Everybody complains about control and command, that it's different.
Yeah.
You have to switch machines. You're endlessly falling over that. It's such a pain.
Yeah, I was really scared, actually. All right. Is there anything else you guys would like to add?
Yeah, Peter, is there anything you think we haven't covered that is worth bringing up?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that, like, I think, again, everybody should definitely try to implement some kind of CI in their project. May it be a side project, to just try it out and make sure that you know how to do it. Some companies even require it as part of their interview process, to kind of understand this type of workflows and make sure that you know how a CI actually works, so that like when you start working in a team, you kind of realize that like, hey, you need to be committing code and you need to wait for a CI to build, and you need to know that there's probably going to be some kind of like tools and some automation. So I think a lot of companies are expecting you to kind of know what a CI is and being able to build a CI. And sometimes when they don't have a CI, you going in and actually implementing it is going to be very, very beneficial to the company. And I think the company will probably also really, I guess, I don't want to say the word praise you for it, but like they might actually thank you for kind of like also just creating that automation. So it's a really beneficial skill as a mobile engineer to have mobile DevOps experience. So I definitely recommend everybody to at least try it. If you have the time like me at some point, like try all the platforms, see what you get. A lot of them have free tiers. I know Bitrise has a free tier that's pretty nice. And yeah, I think GitHub Actions has one, and I mean, I think some of the others do. Some of them you have to pay for straight up. So yeah, just pick your platform, and definitely go out there and try mobile DevOps. I guarantee it's going to make a difference in your development life.
Yes. I think it covers it really well, yeah?
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I think it's safe to say that we at Bitrise agree with you 100%. And unfortunately, we're reaching the time limit. So thank you so much again, PJ, for joining us today and sharing your experience with us. Thanks, Kevin, for joining as well. And everyone, you can follow PJ on Twitter at PJ Apples. Check out his talks and articles on his website, which are linked in the show notes, along with all the other resources we mentioned. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did. Thanks for listening and stay tuned for the next episode. Bye.